We have a revised talk schedule. We had Dorothy Wilhelm, who was so popular last year. She was going to talk in April, and she's had some health issues. And so we have Dave Shipley coming in instead in April. So the April talk will be him talking about historic sites of Thurston County. He's done a kind of a driving tour map of Thurston County sites, and he's going to talk about the western part of the county in April 20th. And Dennis Larson will be here next month, and he was a popular speaker from last year too. He'll be talking about his favorite subject, and that's Ezra Meeker and his glory years in hop growing and in some of that era. So that's going to be fun too. And as long as we'll talk kind of background stuff here. We have house tours. Bob Krim leads house tours, guided house tours of this place, and they're very, very popular. But we usually include the archives in the basement in that tour, but right now it's kind of shut down for some projects we're doing. But in a way, it's good news because there's two things that we have. One is a lot of our artifacts that we would normally show people down there are missing from us right now because we loaned them to the State Museum in Tacoma. It's part of a display at the State Museum that'll be there until early April. It's about beer, wine, and coffee in our Washington State history. And so some of the Capital Brewing Company bottle filling machinery and a nice restored keg from the 1890s is in that display. So when it comes back to us, you'll certainly want to come back and see it here. But right now, we're getting so well known, we're loaning items to other museums and bigger ones like in Tacoma. Also, another thing we are excited about here is we just landed a grant from Thurston County for our archives. Our curators, all of us are excited because part of our collection down there is original artwork from Olympia Brewery Company advertising campaigns from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and up to the 60s. And so we have a lot of really neat original artwork, really fine stuff. And so with this grant, we're able to put them into good order and keep them in acid-free containers and things that they need to be in. And we want to, in either October or November, haven't set the date yet, to have an art show and talk. One of our history talks will be about that artwork. And then for the whole month here at the Schmidt House, we'll have a schedule of art show viewing some of that original artwork. So we're excited about that. That'll be something new and different for us. And what else? Oh, my latest project, I'm working with Robert at TCTV, and we are working on a virtual video tour of the old brew house and the whole complex down there. So you'll be able to, it's shut down to the public right now for live tours, but Paul Knight, the former brewmaster that gave those tours, is going to be our tour guide for this video. And we're just about through doing the post-production work, and by March sometime next month, it should be ready for viewing. So, as public history manager, I have the privilege to introduce our speakers each month. And today I can introduce someone who needs no introduction, because it's me. So I will just put that piece of paper away. All right. Let's see. Let's go ahead and start the first slide here. I'm giving you the business. In some circles, I've maybe become known as the guy whose business is history. And some people comment about my presentation saying, when it comes to local history, Trosper really gives us the business. And so I'm not quite sure how to take that. I'll just let it inspire me to focus in on a very big topic, which is the business history of our hometown of Tumwater. So today I have a bit of a challenge in that I'm attempting over the next hour to review about 172 years of history. And I have a lot of photos to go through, and I want to leave some time for your questions and comments too, so bear with me. This should be an adventure, kind of fun. I found myself searching for a longer-term history project to sink my teeth into, and happened upon the idea of looking into this special community's business history. It could become a series of articles, I'm sure, or short video features, which we like to do. I've done articles and features on local businesses and even worked on a book for a family-owned business in Olympia, so in a way I've kind of started the project already and been formulating this project. So, of course, working for the foundation, Olympia Tumwater Foundation, all of us on staff put in many research hours on the history of the Schmidt family and the brewery, a project that continues with many discoveries in our rich archives here. It is, after all, the most visible and important business in our area's past, a business that made Tumwater and Olympia both famous. And so as I began to scratch the surface of the topic beyond the brewery, I was amazed by the multitude of businesses that have been here over the years and the stories of the people behind them. And this, I find, is a topic that can keep me busy as a historian for many years. In fact, I hope to pass this on to new generations of historians, I think. It's something. Well, you think about it, business plays an essential role in any community. It not only provides employment, it gives an identity to the people of the area. It supports civic projects, it provides leadership and direction, And businesses serve not only their customers, but their entire community in many, many ways. Business people were and are the visionaries and risk takers, guiding and building the future of their local culture. If there were no business, there would be nothing to draw and support people to any location. So tracing the history of business is really tracing the history of the people of, well, any part of the world. When business flourishes, the town flourishes. When business fades, so does the town. So a study of business history involves many aspects of our lives. It involves things like transportation issues, water issues come up, postal service, schools, churches, cemeteries, and parks. We could talk about grocery stores, manufacturing, restaurants, entertainment, various forms of skilled labor that are involved in any community. Business supports nonprofit service organizations, school sports, community celebrations, and even pulls people together during disasters and tough times. So a study of business history reflects the changes in technology also, and the cultural changes that happen, political trends, issues of all kinds. So when you're studying this business history, you're really studying an overview of history. Over the generations, many businesses fall by the wayside, while new businesses rise up. A few continue for 2 or 3 generations before new ownership takes over. Landmarks rise and fall to be replaced by new landmarks. Labor unions arise to create a balance economically. Sometimes great strife occurs among groups with differing visions. Small businesses, locally owned, find themselves competing with large national or regional corporations. Changes in cultural tastes and preferences bring about different businesses to support those. In fact, I remember when, in my kid days, putt-putt golf courses were the rage. There was one out on Little Rock Road by the cemetery that I used to go to. Pizza places caught on, Shakey's, Luigi's, some of those pizza parlors. The drive-through hamburger stands, that was a big treat to us kids. Egan's is one that I remember. The drive-in movie theaters, everything was drive-in. I remember those days. There was a time when Mexican restaurants or ice cream parlors were the rage, and it just all changes over time. Video stores gave way to coffee shops. Cabins became motels, which gave way to hotels. Tent camping morphed into RVs. TV antennas on every roof turned into satellite dishes and then cable. Phone companies turned into cell and smartphone businesses. Think about the history of transportation as horse carriage rides became horseless, and that developed eventually into cruising the streets with your hot rods. Trolleys became buses. Stoplights turned into traffic circles. I see you gritting your teeth a little bit too, me too. And large breweries gave way to micro and craft brewery operations. One-room schoolhouses became multiple school districts. I never thought we'd have 2 high schools in this town, and here we do. And that gigantic Peter G. Schmidt School, like a high school in itself, it's just amazing. Baseball, football, and basketball continues, but now we add to that mix soccer, golf courses, marathon running, things like that. We still have needs of plumbers and electricians and carpenters, but now we add to that computer technicians. So things are changing. Old rail lines become bike and hiking trails. Smokestack industries move into more ecologically minded stewards of the environment. An influx of foreign-born immigrants can create businesses to serve them and influence others. So, what can I say? Whew. Business history is quite a topic and a multitude of stories to tell, and they are our stories, they're our history. And how's that for an introduction? So I think, well, let's get started. We have an overview of Tumwater business history here, a thumbnail sketch, if you will. In fact, I'm going to arrange this tour into 4 main segments, probably spend about 10 minutes on each segment here, or each era, representing Tumwater's growth and development. The first one is the first 50 years of Tumwater, centered upon water-powered industry of the Deschutes River. The second, I would call the early Schmidt era, which includes the arrival of the Schmidts, but also modern technologies like electricity, automobiles, telephones, highways, things like that. The next segment will be I call the second Schmidt era, and that's the lifting of Prohibition, and that encompasses World War II years and the great expansion of Tumwater and the boundaries and population. And then finally, the modern era, and I equate that with the late 1950s and Interstate 5 arriving. The sale and eventual closure of the brewery happened during that modern era, and then move forward to the present growth of what we now know as the city of Tumwater. So there's what we want to cover, and it's going to be fun here. So let's get started with the first 50 years. There we go, water-powered industry along the Deschutes. The Deschutes River was the focal point, The industries were down at the river with their network of dams and flumes, and the Main Street businesses were above on the west side. What's now Deschutes Parkway was Main Street, Tumwater. That's where all the businesses were, the commercial and political center. Olympia's 5 years younger. It was started in 1850, where we were 1845. So they became the commercial and political center, while Tumwater remained the industrial center of this area. Simmons, Michael T. Simmons, our founder, was the first of our business people, really, because he made the first water-powered grist mill at the Lower Falls, and then also he and some others built the first sawmill there at the Lower Falls also. So he was what we would call the first business person. He wasn't that great of a business person, but I can go into that later. But the Crosbys came and bought out Simmons' claim, and they modernized the mill. In fact, they built a really, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but they had a store and real estate office on Main Street, and that's the Crosbys. They were ship's captains supplying the settlers in the Puget Sound area, and just fell in love with the Puget Sound and brought their families out west and settled right here in Tumwater. So they were really the first good, successful business people of Tumwater. And in fact, really, their money maker was the real estate business they had, because they owned the Simmons claim, and that included the whole river and all that water power. So they can charge an arm and a leg to have rights to the water power. They built the Lincoln Flouring Mill below, down at our waterfront. That's located now where Tumwater Historic Park is. And you'll see that multi-story white structure. That was their Lincoln Flour Mill that the Crosbys built. And you'll see in the background the wagon bridge connecting Tumwater with Olympia. They called it the Long Bridge. It had a turnstile, too, that could allow shallow draft boats and barges to serve the businesses of the industrial town at high tide. So this is not Capitol Lake. This is Simmons Inlet, I guess you'd call it, or estuary. And the Crosbys not only built the Lincoln Flouring Mill, they also built Crosby House, Nathaniel Crosby and his wife. And they were the grandparents of Bing Crosby, so we do have that connection. So yes, there is a Crosby connection that way. And Bing never lived here. He was, I think, born in Tacoma, perhaps, and went to Gonzaga University in Spokane. So he must have visited his grandparents, though, at Crosby House, I'm sure. And I know he helped restore the house and preserve it. The Daughters of the Pioneers now operate that, and is owned by the city of Tumwater. So the Crosbys are important business people of Tumwater's history. Other businesses included PRESSEY and ESTERLY. Robert Esterly is the main guy there. On the left-hand side, you'll see the Esterly Mill, which is the only planing mill in Tumwater in 1896, located at the beginning of that long bridge that we showed you earlier. Robert Esterly is in the center there, kind of a dapper guy. Yeah, the only time I get called dapper is when I wear that kind of costume anyway. But he was a businessman who began with partner E.B. PRESSEY building furniture. And he also served on the board of trustees for Tumwater, which today would be called the city council. So he was a Tumwater city councilman. Some people say he was a mayor at one point, but I haven't confirmed that. But Esterly House, you see on the right, kind of a Victorian house, really nice, was what he lived in. That's located in what's now Tumwater Historic Park down below too. And he was a photographer, so some of the photos you'll see, actually, he took, and including this one here on the right. So Esterly, we go from Esterly, we go next to James Biles and his tannery. He had a tannery down at the site of where the Schmidts built their brewery. And so that was what it looked like before the Schmidts arrived, with not only the Biles and Carter tannery, but there was a Tumwater Ice Company located there too. So there were businesses along there for many years before the Schmidts arrived. The GELBACH flour mill was a mill that was created at what they call the created Middle Falls of the river. And so that was a flouring mill. Mr. and Mrs. George GELBACH purchased the property from Ward and Mitchell in 1879. And the right-hand picture is a view of that looking downstream from the upstream side. GELBACH sold out to the Olympia Power and Light Company in 1892, and they turned it into the first hydroelectric power plant on the river. So that is at what we call the Middle Falls. It's now just a rapids, but there was a man-made dam there that made it so they can have a mill there. So that's the GELBACHs. And the GELBACH flour mill also became the first stop on the Olympia to Tenino Railway. There was a narrow gauge railway as the Northern Pacific was making its way north to Puget Sound from the south. Everybody was trying to become the terminus of the railway, and whoever landed that designation was going to be the major city on Puget Sound. And since we were the territorial capital, we thought we had a pretty good chance of landing that designation. But they bypassed this. Tacoma was their choice, had a better harbor and so on. So Tacoma became the major city on the Sound, and we were in danger of losing the capital status and business and so on. So our town fathers of Olympia and Tumwater joined together and built their own narrow gauge railway from Percival Landing and the docks down there, and coming around what's now Capitol Lake, and came through Tumwater, and the GELBACH flour mill was the first stop on that railway that ended up in Tenino to hook up with the Northern Pacific down there. So it pretty much followed the old highway, old 99. So the railway was another one of our businesses. We were growing, and there was grocery or general stores. You'll see here some of those. We had a lot of them in Tumwater at the time. The Cook grocery store is in the upper center there. That was on Tumwater's Main Street. Also the Berntrager's grocery store. And then on the lower right is the O'Hare Brothers store. That was a little more modern. That's 1930s for that photo. So we had grocery stores and general stores and a lot of commercial businesses along Main Street. And in fact, I go to the next photo, and this is businesses along Main Street. And you can see the footbridge over the lower falls. That's the original one there. And up on what's now Deschutes Parkway, you see the commercial buildings. And from left to right, on the left is Lee and Biles' store, and there was a dance hall on the second floor. And then to the right of that was the Kiefer Saloon, and to the right of that is the Kiefer Home. And then to the far right is the Wallace Hotel right next to the Krantz Hotel. So that was all along Tumwater's Main Street. And a lot of other Tumwater businesses, and I could list a long list. I just put a few on here, and you can't read them from where you are, but it was Ward and Hayes Grist Mill. That was near the Upper Falls. Tumwater Ice Company I mentioned. There's a Ransom Paget Barber Shop, Tumwater Lumber Company, McNeil's store. In fact, one thing right at the bottom, I mentioned the Eastmans. They had a blacksmith shop, which is located where the modern-day Falls Terrace restaurant now is. That was a blacksmith shop. So that's the first 50 years. 10 minutes? Yeah, I did pretty well with the timing on that. So let's go to the next era, the early Schmidt era, and the new modern technologies that came in. Business is always a gamble. In 1893, the nation was in an economic recession, which affected the entire country and especially the West Coast. And this is not a Tumwater scene, by the way. We think that's from the Spar restaurant in Olympia. Drew Crooks is here. Maybe you can identify that. But these guys were playing cards and gambling. And so I just liked that photo, and I thought, well, business is a gamble, so let's put that photo in. But it is a gamble. And the Schmidts arrived, and they bought out from the widow of James Biles, the Biles and Carter tannery site from Mrs. Biles. And so the Schmidts built on the right there, that's the same site, just the first of the breweries, the Capitol Brewing Company in 1896. So, and then you can see on the far right of that, the Lower Falls coming down the river there. And the Schmidts had, well, a great success. There's the amazing growth. In fact, they were growing so fast that they had to use the buildings as they were being built around them. This is the keg storage house, or keg house that was being built, and they were storing their kegs even while the walls were being built. It was growing that fast, it was hard to keep up to the demand. The next photo is a nice one too. This is the barrel house, making the barrels for shipping bottles, actually, put in those barrels, and then also kegs they would build there. So that was a big construction part of the brewery. But the market grew. The Olympia Brewing Company, well, actually, the Capitol Brewing Company turned into Olympia, but they had markets in Alaska to serve the gold rush in the Yukon. They had Hawaii. We were the biggest brand in Hawaii, the Sandwich Islands. San Francisco, railroads to the east, and even Shanghai, China to the west, or should I say Far East. All along the Pacific Rim, Philippines and Australia, Olympia beer was found all over there. So there was a very big brand, and they were growing in leaps and bounds, and it became the area's largest employer for Tumwater and Olympia. This was a crew from 1903, and in the center of that is one of our brewmasters, one of the early ones, Mr. Nauman, is in the center there, lower center. So it was a huge employer. It was, in fact, as long as the Schmidts operated the brewery, it became the largest employer in the area, even before Prohibition and after both. The Schmidts took care of their folks, and they in their community. This was the Tumwater Club, located where Evergreen Olympic Realty now is, next to the old Gillette and Guffey on that side of the Capitol Boulevard. This was an athletic club. It was a multi-purpose room. They had governor's balls there and all kinds of things. It was a good-sized building. They called it the Tumwater Club. And so they took care of their employees and the general public and the population. And the people loved it. And this is another one of those photos I just had to put in because it's fishermen out fishing, but you notice on the running board of their Model T, it's Olympia beer bottles. So I had to include that one. So people loved what was happening with the brewery. In 1902, there was the name change. It became Olympia Brewing Company, and that's when they adopted the It's the Water slogan. And in 1906 is when the iconic Brewhouse Tower, the brick building, was built. And that's the picture on the lower right there, or the right. So the gravity brewing increased production, and so it was going great guns. This is kind of the peak of their production of the old brew house there. You see Schmidt House up above, and by then they've added the extension that we're sitting in now. So that's post-1910 in this photograph then. And so it's a very good, big, growing concern. They didn't hardly have room to house it all. And so they were going great guns. And the brewery was at the center, but there were many other businesses here too, along with them. And so this is a view looking down at the Brewhouse Tower from up a little bit on Tumwater Hill, if you can, kind of where the old City Hall is, I think. But anyway, that's the view looking down. And but other businesses, probably the main one that I think of right away is the transition to electric generating power on the Deschutes. The water power industries were failing, and I mean, it was not as efficient as diesel and all the kinds they could do in modern sawmills and so on. So they started to use it for hydroelectric power generating, and that was on the river. And where the lower platform is that we stand on when we look at the lower falls, that's the base of this Tenino sandstone structure that housed that modern electric generators. And there was a great big 10-foot diameter metal pipe that came from the upper falls, went down the river to the lower falls to power that, the water to power the generators to run electricity for Olympia and Tumwater both. It was the power source for those early days, right here on the Deschutes. This is another view of this, the Tenino sandstone structure. You can see that pipe coming in, bringing that water in so it'd have a good flow and good power to run those generators. So Olympia Power and Light Company, Hazard Stevens was among those that were a part of that company. Isaac Stevens is our first territorial governor, and Hazard was his son, so he was a part of that. Let's see, what else do we have here? With traffic, well, let's see, let's talk about the infrastructure grew, and this is the bridge over the Deschutes. In fact, this is 3 different views of it in 3 different eras, actually. It's the same bridge that we cross over, Boston Street Bridge, where the Falls Terrace restaurant is now. And so on the left is the horse and buggy era, I guess you would say, the wooden bridge. And then the center is still that wooden bridge, the horseless carriage era. The cars started to come along. And so they built a concrete bridge that is still standing in the 1910 to 20 era. I forget the date exactly right now, but that bridge has been remodeled a little bit since then, and so it's still there, and that's the Boston Street Bridge. And all that traffic between Portland and Seattle came through that Pacific Highway and made those sharp turns onto that bridge, sharp turn up to Custer, another sharp turn up. It was a real bottleneck there. But along with the traffic then comes restaurants. This is the Chicken Coop, one of the more famous restaurants in Tumwater at that time. At the corner of Custer and Cleveland, there's a 7-Eleven there now, and right behind that is Pellegrino's. It used to be the Monument Works, if you're old enough to remember that. But it was on that corner. That's the Chicken Coop restaurant. But not only restaurants, there was also service stations, early gas stations. You see some of those with the Model T on the right. And the predecessors to motels. This is my grandpa's brother, Nate Trosper, owned this, and that was where Trosper Road comes into Old 99 or Capitol Boulevard. Plaza Jalisco is now on the site of where this Olympic Auto Camp was. They rented out cabins and had a general store and gas station, and they could barbecue. They had community kitchens and things like that. So it was the predecessor to motels, which eventually became hotels and so on. So that's a lot of businesses happen around here. Bicycles were very popular at the turn of the century here in Olympia and Tumwater. And so we see on the left the Hewitt and Ashley bicycle shop in Tumwater next to the Hewitt drugstore. And that's almost directly across from where the Falls Terrace now is, where the freeway side is. And there were hundreds of bicycle owners in this Tumwater Olympia area at the turn of the century. I think there was 1,000 count at one point. And on the right, you'll see a wooden structure called the Velodrome that was at the fairgrounds, which is located where Sunset Life building now is. Behind there. We had a fairgrounds in Tumwater, and the Velodrome is a big part of that. So they had bicycle races there. So they were very popular in business. And then also farming was a big part of local business in the Tumwater area. And that is a picture of the Wiki Farm, which is closely related to the Schmidts, actually, and Dan O'Neill, his grandparents, I think it was. And the Wiki Farm is now a development called The Farm, where Cleveland Avenue turns into the Yelm Highway on that curve. The farm development was actually a farm, and this is it. So farming was a big thing in local business, but so was the timber industry. That was king, of course, in the Black Hills and around. And so we had a sawmill right there at the upper falls of the Deschutes, where Tumwater's Falls Park is now, probably closer to the old 99 bridge, the Custerway Bridge, or not the Custerway, the Totem Pole Bridge. So it was right there and put out a lot of lumber. And then, of course, the Hewitt drugstore was a center point of Tumwater because Eva Hewitt and her husband ran that drugstore, and they housed the post office for Tumwater, located right across where the Boston Street Bridge comes into Deschutes Parkway there, just on the freeway side. So you could look out the window and see the traffic on the bridge. And so that was because it was the post office that became the center point of Tumwater. It had a soda fountain and was the place to go to get caught up in all the latest news and gossip and visit with friends and neighbors. And Eva Hewitt, I should say, became the postmistress of Tumwater and the longest lasting postmistress we've ever had in Tumwater. And so she ran that for many, many years. So that is that next era. Did I do 10 minutes? My timing's not too bad. So in the next one, I'll call the second Schmidt era and World War II expansion. And that's when Prohibition was lifted and the Schmidts created a modern version of the Olympia Brewing Company upstream from the original site. So in the 1930s is when Prohibition was lifted, and they still had a heart for brewing, even though they'd gotten into the hotel industry and transportation and things like that. Once Prohibition was lifted, they want to come right back and make Olympia beer again. And the old employees from the Capital Brewing Company and Olympia Beer wanted to work for them again, too. So they couldn't make the old brew house. It didn't have enough room. It couldn't be efficient enough to make a modern operation. So they decided to stay by the river so they'd be near the artesian water wells. And they went upstream and built over here the modern brewery. So that's their expansion. And I better show you the next photo. There we go. I will in a second. There we go. So that's the first of the modern brewing operations. And they raised the funds by selling stock, individual stock, to residents of Olympia and Tumwater. My grandpa had a chance to buy a stock or two, and he kicked himself for years later because he didn't do that. You know, if he'd have done that, kind of like investing in Microsoft when Bill Gates was a kid, you know, you kick yourself, oh boy, if I'd have just done that, because all of a sudden that stock would have been very valuable. But he didn't want to risk the Trosper Ranch, so he didn't do that. But that's how they raised the funds to build the new brewery, and they did. They were very successful. And then, once again, it became the Olympia Brewing Company, the largest employer of Olympia and Tumwater. There's some of the modern kettles and some of the crew from later years. And so with that expansion, that brought traffic. And so let's go to the next photo. And this is an aerial view of the Boston Street Bridge. And there's the modern brewery rising up on the other side of the river. You see on the lower right, there's a kind of a shop. It's actually the site of what's now the Falls Terrace restaurant. But it was and then the Hewitt drugstore would be in the center, right where the bridge comes into the road there. So this is goes up and turns into Custerway, and that goes right across. And so that traffic was handled, all that traffic between Portland and Seattle went on that windy little road, and it became quite a traffic bottleneck. And so they had to expand or modernize the traffic pattern. So they built the Car Line Bridge, or what we call the Totem Pole Bridge. And so that's an aerial view of that. That was 4 lanes. And so they can go have a straight through shot instead of making all those sharp turns and go right down through Olympia. And so that's the totem pole on the ends. And with the increase in traffic came an increase in business. One of those is the Oregon Trail restaurant. How many remember that? The Oregon Trail, yeah, quite a few of us. And that, in later years, it became the South Pacific, and now it's the South Vacant. I don't know, nobody's in it right now. It's for sale if you want to start a restaurant, I guess. So that's Oregon Trail, that was a big thing. Service stations sprouted up all over. A modern fire department on the other side of the river there. And in fact, what we call the old city hall, that was our fire department. In fact, a lot of the brewery employees were firemen in that they manned the fire department. The next slide is kind of fun. This, anybody know what this is? This is Tumwater Square. And over to the left, where we don't show Gillette and Guffey in that little complex, but this is the Custer Way going that way, and Capitol Boulevard straight ahead, and then Cleveland up on the right. And the woods you see on the upper right is where they built Safeway later on. So this is Tumwater Square, how it looked in those days before Safeway, I guess you'd say. And it developed. And then part of that was the Brown's lumber store. It was the City Lumber and Builders, which was on Custer Way. And that's the Brown family. And brother Jake is on the left. Dad Emmett is in this next. And then comes Vince. And then Jim Brown, who so many people know from Tumwater days, is on the right. Young Jim Brown in that photo. He became my history mentor before he passed away. And their slogan for their business was Brown's Boards Build Better Buildings. So you need to use that for a slogan in the advertising campaign. As we go a little bit farther down towards Olympia direction, we see the Carline Street, and this is what it looked before Sunset Life was there. So you see where it veered up, and that's Carline. And then in the far upper center, you'll see the Cloverfields Farm, which is a state-of-the-art electric-run dairy farm, and now that is where Olympia High School is. So this is before North Street became usable. It was just a kind of a gravel road. Carline was the main way to get back there. And so that's the beginning of the development, where it's kind of blank on the right-hand side. That's where the fairgrounds had been, and that velodrome that I showed you earlier. So these are neat old photos, and I could spend a lot of time on this if I allowed myself. The old brewery building, it was abandoned, but they were using it for other businesses. And the connecting building is a really large floor space down there, and it's still in very good shape down there. But Western Metalcraft started to operate in that, and a lot of other businesses too over the years. But this is a photo of Western Metalcraft and some of their drill presses and lathes and so on. And then upstream on Cleveland Avenue, where the kind of across from the cemetery overlooking the river, is where Chambers Packing Company was up until the early 60s. And meat packers, and they had kind of a feud with the Schmidts a little bit, because the Schmidts wanted to develop Tumwater Valley, I think. And so they tried to buy out the Chambers Packing, and there were legal battles going on. So finally, Chambers Packing sold at a bigger price than they were asking for originally, because it had all the legal problems going on. And so they ended up moving to Maytown exit with their Chambers Packing Company down there off of I-5. Another business is south of Tumwater, and that's really more than a business. It's a port of Olympia, the Olympia Airport, or Tumwater International Airport. This right there. I call it that because they don't like it. They're Olympia. That's all right. But that's what it looked like. In that era, it was developing pretty well. In fact, the Schmidts had a hand in building that airport too. They were instrumental in that. And then here's some of the lists, a partial list of the other Tumwater businesses of the era. I didn't mention Heath's Flowers in Tumwater Square. Artistry and Flowers was starting. Jake's Used Cars, you still see the remnants of his place there. Western Meats is a pretty old business run by the family there, and they're still operating. Southgate Grocery and Tumwater Food Lockers on 2nd Avenue. The Bargain Barn down on and State Highway Department buildings down there on Capitol Boulevard. Deschutes Animal Clinic down there. Pogue's Mobile Station, I don't know if you remember that. Hank's Corner Grocery. The Point Tavern was an iconic structure for so long. 2 cemeteries, Olympic Memorial Gardens and Masonic and Oddfellows. So Little Rock Road and also on North Street. And Olympic Monument Works, where Pellegrino's now is. And just many more. I'm sure you could add a lot of names to this list of businesses that were from that era, because we're getting closer and closer to our modern era. In fact, that's the next stop here. My timing is pretty good. I'm getting along here. In fact, this I call the modern era. You know, ancient people used to use shells and beads for money, but now we're more sophisticated. We use little plastic cards. But the modern era, I just arbitrarily decided it was 1950s and 60s because that's when the freeway came in. And that was a major change in our culture and in our town. It split Tumwater in half. And so at that era then, the brewery was still going strong. You can see some of the photos from, remember the fountain out here on Custer Way?
My dad.
Your dad is in this?
Yeah, in the cake department. That's my dad.
Is that right?
Yes, that's Al Jarrell.
All right. Thanks for raising your hand here. We probably have all his information in our archives.
The other day, that's his sweater I gave to you the other day.
Oh, that's you? Okay, yes, thank you so much for that.
That's him.
Yes. Is that right? Oh, neat. All right, thank you.
For 33 years.
Huh. All right. Good. And this is the tasting room, of course, here in the lower left. So brought thousands of people off I-5 to visit the brewery and go on those tours. And so it was still going strong. In fact, so strong, we showed up in the movies. A lot of movies, we had Olympia beer as a brand name in the scenes. And this was from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Jack Nicholson was hoisting an Oldie, in the movie. Clint Eastwood had a lot of Oldies in his movies. A lot of movie stars had Olympia beer as part of their marketing. But the freeway is really what brought in the modern era and the interstate highway system. And this shows the bridges being built that were going to cross over what's now Capitol Lake. And they were building the Capitol Way, or expanding that bridge over the freeway, Capitol Way. And so this is what it looked like when they were constructing it. And this is another view, an aerial view from the east looking to the west, I think is. Yeah, that's what's now Capitol Lake. So you can see that the bridge hadn't been put across the lake yet. But you can see also that the right-of-way was cleared out over to the left where that Hewitt drugstore was and all those houses and so on. That was ready to be built into a freeway. So it was a major shock to the system, but yet a part of our growth also. The next shot is part of that progress. I put a question mark on that because some people say that progress and growth is not progress at all, but it is. On the left, you'll see the Boston Street Bridge, and there's the Hewitt drugstore on the left, and then other stores to the right. And so that's just as the freeway was going to start to cut into things. The center photo shows the Hewitt drugstore gone by then. And the right one shows it all empty, ready to start building a freeway. And you'll see the old City Hall on the upper part of that. And next to that, to the right, which is now a parking lot, was Tumwater First Baptist Church. But that City Hall expanded and the fire station expanded over the years until Tumwater grew out of everything and had to move south. And so we'll talk about that maybe later. So that's the aerial view and the progress. With the freeway, we got a new Custer Way Bridge overpass. So they were building that Custer Way Bridge from here all the way over to the other side where the old City Hall is. So that was something we got because we had the freeway come through. And so we got the first one, that's on the left. And then as later on when they expanded and widened I-5, we got a bigger one, and that's the picture on the right. You can see the growth of the brewery operation over those years. So not only bridges, but we got improved utilities, and to the south, a brand new interchange with much new business. And one of the chief ones of those was the Tyee Motor Inn. The Trosper Road overpass was our first interchange, and all of a sudden the business community and everybody started to move south, and Tumwater expanded to the south. So that's the Tyee on one side of the freeway, and on the other side, the Thompson's grocery store turned into the Southgate supermarket. And the Votneys pretty much were the beginners of that, and then the Goobies, Dave and Marge Gooby, and their partners built up the Southgate supermarket. And in that complex then, not only Rexall Drug and some of those, but also we got a new library at Southgate, and I have a photo of that. Remember when that library was there? And so that is part of the Southgate growth and the development. And then we go back on Old 99, and I have a before and after of the Sunset Life building. It was 1959 that Sunset Life built their headquarters building here in Tumwater, where Carline comes into Capitol Boulevard. And before that, it was the county fairgrounds, and that's what I'm showing you on the left. So you have a before and after shot of that site. And then also, the sad part of the era was when in 2003, the breweries, well, first it was 83, the Schmidt sold to Pabst. Pabst sold to Miller. Miller got gobbled up by South African Brewery. And by 2003 is when they blew the last whistle. And so that was really the end of our historic era with the Schmidt family, although our Olympia Tumwater Foundation is a part of what they started, and this history program we can give a lot of credit to the Schmidt family for that. So it's been a huge part of our history, and we like to highlight it here. But as we get close to the end of the modern era, I have a few do you remember questions. Do you remember Pogue's Automotive and Towing? It was only a couple of years ago that they shut down and sold. Tumwater got a high school for the first time back in, 62, I believe it was. And then, of all things, we had 2 high schools, Black Hills High School. And so my son went through first 2 years in Tumwater, and then they had the new school, so he went the last 2 years at Black Hills. And it was just amazing to me, because Tumwater High was pretty small in 1971 when I graduated with a class of about 120 people or so. It never was that small since. But Falls Terrace, remember when that was built, and then the development of Tumwater Valley and the restaurant down there and the golf course. Charlie's Trailer Sales, remember that? Albertsons is there now, where Little Rock Road comes into Trosper. There was Safeway, Bailey Drugs, and the Narrowsonic development across the street there, so Tumwater Square expanded. Kildow's Nursery, remember that? Down on Old 99, or Capitol Boulevard. Egan's Big Tom, both at Southgate and at Custer and Cleveland. And they were kind of a mini chain of hamburger stands in Lacey and Olympia and West Side and East Side. And Tumwater had 2 of them. Remember the Bonneville substation? That's still there, actually, at the end of Trosper Road where you're heading towards Black Lake and you make that sharp turn and there's all that electric stuff. That's a big part of our business. Sunset Drive-In became the Timberland Library and eventually the new City Hall. That was the drive-in movie theater. Zabel's owned that for a while. I have to mention my dad's business, Trosper Cement Products on Trosper Road. And the building's still there. We rent it out to another business, but had to mention that. Baynard Glass, remember they were located off of Capitol Boulevard. Tumwater Lanes, the bowling alley. Hatcher's Egg Farm farther down. Air Industrial Center, it was developed around the airport, and also the Mottman Industrial Area was developed. Wolbert's Tree Farm, way back down there by the Trails End Stables. And so that's all down there. So a lot of, and I know you could add a lot of memories and more memories to this list, but that was just a few that I came up with for this. Then the national chain stores came to town as part of our history, and that means, that's when the Tumwater Action Committee was formed. TIE was still going then, but it became the Chamber of Commerce of Tumwater. And then we had the parade, the 4th of July parade, and the fireworks, and a new tradition with a lot of business help. A lot of business people got involved in that. But the chain stores includes Fred Meyer, Costco, Albertsons, Home Depot, Walmart, Motel 6, hotels, fast food. I mean, a lot of national chain stores came into Tumwater, and they still are. Don't forget, too, the Tumwater skyscrapers. The state moved in. We never had skyscrapers before, but to us, 3- or 4-story buildings are skyscrapers. L&I buildings and all this. So that came in, and we became a bedroom community, I guess, for the state, and we welcome them. That gives some sort of tax money, I suppose, but not everybody lives in Tumwater that works there. But it moved into town. So let's see here. There's obviously a wealth of material for future history projects. We here at the History Builders program will, of course, put a priority on the history of the Schmidt family and the Olympia Brewery. After all, that gives our town our unique identity and may also be a foundational basis for future development of craft and microbrewing industry here in Tumwater. There's things afoot that could turn this into where Walla Walla was revitalized by the wine industry, we could with craft brewing here. So we'll see what happens with that. We have that history. One question I pose is, how many of our business people today know much about our rich heritage here? That's one thing that helped inspire me to start working on this. I can envision future books about this, maybe talks and videos on this general topic of business in Tumwater that will hopefully be further developed by future generations of historians. And I think about my project idea, it makes a lot of sense to work backwards from the present in order to capture the memories of those of us who have lived it the past 50 years or more. And with your help, I'd like to arrange interviews, collect photos, maybe you have some of those, perhaps some smaller artifacts, and some compiled human interest stories related to the businesses that we all remember. So I'm hoping to inspire you a little bit to give us a call and set up a time that we can visit with you and get your memories about some of these businesses that you and your family were involved in, or just the memories that you have or photos you might have. My imagination runs wild with all the options. So we could take some of the old landmarks and focus on those in pictorial format and a book form. We could highlight the employees of the various businesses, including trade unions and suppliers and the many service industries in their forms. There were many stories of small, often family-owned businesses that tell us so much about our local culture. So I hope that by highlighting this topic today in outline form, I will inspire you to take a little of your valuable time to jot down your memories, some notes, collect some old photos, and then drop by to visit us with what you come up with. And call first, but yeah. But whatever you do, don't just toss it all away and lose all those memories that future generations will treasure. Business history is people history. They're your stories, they're our history. Thank you very much. So we do have, I thought we'd get some hands up. Let's start off with you, if you have a comment or question.
Yeah, I came to this part of the world in about 68, 69, and I was just wondering how long it took to build that freeway through town.
How long it took? It didn't take too long, but it expanded over the years too. So it's kind of an ongoing project in a way. But yeah, it was, in fact, they had the ribbon cutting, 59 was it?
About 10 years.
Not even that. That was probably just a couple years. There was a lot of planning, and they had different routes they were going to use, and they wanted to bypass Olympia and Tumwater, and our town fathers and the political people didn't want to have all that traffic bypasses, kind of like when the railroad situation happened. So they wanted I-5 to come through here, and the brewery, of course, wanted that traffic to come by, and the state capitol wanted to show off the Capitol building to all the people traveling I-5. Plus, it's a natural. Highway 101 comes into I-5 right there, and so just good for business and good for tourism and good for our towns. So that's what inspired them, and it wasn't as much controversy as I thought when the freeway split Tumwater in half. I thought there'd be a lot more, nowadays the environmentalists and everybody else would just be up in arms, but at that point we saw the value of it. And in fact, it was also the Eisenhower era in the Cold War, and it was patriotic to have the interstate highway system, and so the people sold their properties along that right of way as a patriotic gesture, if nothing else, and plus they got going rate for their properties, but still that was a... Yeah, Watch Us Grow was the theme of that era, that's right. Tumwater was growing. Yes?
You mentioned microbreweries and the like. What's happening with the old brew house and the stories about microbreweries maybe moving into?
Yes, in fact, it's after all these 100 years or so of that old brew house being vacant, we're finally seeing some action happen. The current owner of the property has all these grandiose plans. I shouldn't phrase it that way, maybe. But it's going to take so many millions of dollars to make those plans come to fruition that he decided he is going to donate the brick brewhouse tower building to the city of Tumwater, which he did this year. And so that's what caused us to shut down the live tours because of the liability issues with the insurance companies and so on. You can't have people go in there, bricks are going to fall on their head, and there's holes on the floor, and that's true. So we decided then to put together a virtual video tour of the old brew house in the meantime, while the city is working on sealing that building with put new roofs on it and seal up the window openings so it will be preserved while they raise the bigger funds it's going to take to restore the building totally with earthquake, everything that they need to do to make it open to the public again. So there's actually something happening with the old brew house, and we're excited about it. Yes, in the back.
What's happening with this brewery?
There is a California-based investment group that has bought that just earlier this year, and we don't know their plans yet. And I won't embarrass Mayor Comet to ask him any secret stuff they're negotiating on. Okay, never mind. But yeah, they're exploring what they can do with that property. Great visibility, access to the freeway. It's going to take some infrastructure growth to make this happen, though, if they're going to make that be valuable commercially. So there's going to be a lot of things they're going to have to do. But we're excited because there's owners here that are looking into it. And we have the brew house donated to the city down here, and there's still all those other plans too. So here we are right in the middle of all that to give a historic perspective here at the foundation. So we're excited about what can happen and what may happen. And with the craft brewing industry getting so big, in cooperation with South Puget Sound Community College and a lot of other EDC and other groups, we're working on seeing something happen with developing that idea. Yes, Ben?
How come the horse show's upside down?
Well, it was something about the luck poured out when you poured the bottle or something. I forget how that worked. We had a slide of that. There, in fact, maybe at the art show we can pull that one out and put it in the art show, because it explained why they had the horseshoe upside down. But it actually was the Schmidt family crest, and they adopted that for their logo for the brewery, and put the picture of the waterfalls in the center of it. So, and the "It's the Water" slogan was adopted in 1902 when they changed the name from Capitol to Olympia Brewing Company. Mayor Pete.
Another great presentation. The old power station at the bottom, this Nino sandstone that was at the top of that, do you know what happened to that?
Well, they tell me that a lot of that Tenino sandstone blocks that were made that building were then used to shore up the trails along the Deschutes River for the Falls Park. And so I suppose if you dug into the banks deep enough, you'd find Tenino sandstone in the shoring up the banks along the river trail. So that's all I've heard about where all those stones went. There's a lot of modern masonry stonework now along the trail that's very classy stuff, very good craftsmanship on that. But that's where I heard that the Tenino sandstone ended up. Anything else? Any business, did you own a business in Tumwater in your young days, or frequent a business? Maybe you went to Egan's a lot. It was a big, yeah, and their goop, yeah. And there's still an Egan's. The son runs an Egan's where the Kildare Nursery, yeah, it is, right kind of under the power lines there, because it crosses Capitol Way, so you can still get the old goop for Egan's. And then the Schmidts lived in this house when I was still in high school. Skip Schmidt was a former mayor, and he and his family and his kids, some of them were my age. And so I remember in high school days coming over here to goof around with them in this house while they still lived here. Never in my wildest imaginations would I think I'd have an office in their upstairs bedroom researching their family history. But here I am at age 63 and almost 64, and boy, it's amazing how time flies. Any other comments or questions? Yes?
If Tumwater owns the brew house now, how are they going to fund the restoration? Is it going to be all taxpayer money or hopefully donations?
Usually it's a public-private partnership, so yes, tax money will no doubt be proposed in dealing with the state legislature. There's a kind of a hierarchy of projects that they have for historic reconstruction of buildings, and we're on that list. In fact, we're making a pitch to the legislature now, but they have the school funding issues right now might delay things. So we don't know how long it's going to take, but it's in process, and we're making the pitch, and it's so visible, and people traveling I-5 all notice that brick tower building and say, you got to restore that. Don't want to let it fall down and rot away. And so it's happening, and we think there's enough political motivation to get that thing going, and we'll see how it goes.
And we'd love to have some help from the community too.
Now, help in actually in-kind contributions or money, financial? Everything? Okay. Good. In fact, we have one of our talks, you'll notice on our talk schedule, we have the city of Tumwater and SPSCC coming here to give a little spiel about this project of a craft brewing center. So it's a modern talk, but it's based on the history of the brewing of Tumwater. So you'll want to come to that too and get the latest update on what's happening with that project and the vision behind it. So Heidi, I think Pete is going to be part of that, and Noel over at the SPSCC. So we have a 3-person presentation coming up in May, I think it is. Yeah, May. Anything else? All right. Oh, yes.
I just got a comment. You know, Ole used to make hams.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people out of Blackslake worked at the brewery. And I asked one of them, what's the difference between Ole and hams? And they said about $1 a 6-pack.
That's right. Olympia was trying to expand and compete with the Budweisers and the Pabsts and all these big national brands, and so they bought out Lone Star in Texas, they bought out Hams in Milwaukee, and went great guns trying to expand and compete with the big guys, but they didn't quite do it. The third generation of Schmidts maybe didn't have the business sense or whatever. They might have overextended themselves, whatever. And so they ended up having to sell out to Pabst, who now owns the Olympia Brewery brand and the formula that they use. And they brew Olympia beer down in California, It's not artesian water, so it's really not the same, even though it's the same formula. The water, it's the water was really true. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you. I hope you collect some of your stories and get in touch with us. Thank you very much.